The woman stood at the massive iron gates and stared up the long, winding driveway. She checked the address on the crumpled paper one last time. This was it. The estate was less a house and more a compound. She smoothed down her simple, clean uniform, took a deep breath, and pressed the buzzer. She needed this job. She really needed this job. A sharp, crackling voice came through the speaker, and the gates opened with a silent, heavy swing. She walked up the path, her worn-out shoes feeling loud on the perfect, hand-laid stones. The house itself was a giant of glass and white marble. It looked like a photograph from a magazine, a place where people didn't actually live. They just existed. It was beautiful, but it was cold. There wasn't a single toy on the lawn, not a bicycle, not a stray leaf. She was let in by a strict-looking housekeeper who gave her a quick, judgmental look and led her through the entrance hall. The woman's footsteps echoed. Echoed was the first word that came to her mind. Everything in this house echoed. It was a house of hard surfaces, of polished floors and high ceilings. A house that held sound and made every tiny noise feel like an intrusion. You will be responsible for the main living areas and the child's wing, the housekeeper said, not slowing down. The owners insist on discretion. You are here to clean. You are not here to talk. You are not here to be seen, if possible. Is that clear? Yes, ma'am, the woman said, her voice sounding too warm for the space. She just wanted to do her work, get her paycheck, and go home to her own small, loud, happy apartment. She met the owners. The millionaire was a tall man with a permanent frown, staring at a stock ticker on a giant screen in his office. He didn't look up when she was introduced, just waved a hand in dismissal. He was a man who didn't have time for a new maid. The wife was the opposite. She was thin and fragile, dressed in silk, and smelled faintly of expensive perfume and something sad. She drifted into the room, her hands fluttering like nervous birds. "Welcome," she whispered, as if she was afraid of the sound of her own voice. My daughter's room is the most important. You must be quiet, you understand. She is unwell." "Unwell?" the maid asked, her natural curiosity getting the best of her. The wife flinched, as if the question was a physical blow. "She does not speak," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "A trauma. From her childhood, we We don't like to discuss it. Just Be gentle. Be invisible." And then she saw the girl. The daughter was in the library, a room as big as a church, sitting in a huge velvet chair, staring out the glass wall at the perfect garden. She was about 8 years old, with beautiful dark hair and the largest, saddest eyes the maid had ever seen. She looked like a doll that had been left on a shelf. "Hello there," the maid said softly, offering a small smile. The girl didn't turn. She didn't blink. She didn't acknowledge the greeting in any way. She just sat. The maid felt a deep, powerful ache in her chest. This wasn't just a quiet child. This was a child who was gone. The first few days were strange. The maid cleaned. She dusted surfaces that were already clean. She polished glass that was already shining. The house was spotless, yet it felt heavy, as if it was holding its breath. The only sounds were the distant, angry tapping of the father's keyboard, the nervous rustle of the mother's silk, and the heavy, thick silence from the child's wing. But the maid was an observer. It was how she had survived. And she began to see things. She saw the way the little girl's shoulders would instantly tense, her back going rigid. Whenever she heard the sound of her father's heavy footsteps in the hall, she saw the way the mother would try to get the girl to take a small, white pill with her orange juice every morning, and the way the girl would silently refuse, clamping her mouth shut until the mother sighed and gave up. She saw that the girl's room, while full of the most expensive toys, was perfectly tidy. The dolls were all in a row. The books were all in order. Nothing was ever out of place. This wasn't a room where a child played. This was a room where a child waited. The maid couldn't help herself. It wasn't in her nature to be invisible. When she was cleaning the girl's room, the girl watching her from the bed, the maid began to hum. It was an old, simple tune her own grandmother used to sing. The girl's head tilted. Just a fraction. The next day, the maid hummed it again. This time, when she left, she placed a small, bright yellow flower she'd found by the driveway on the girl's knitstand. When she came back the next day, the flower was gone. She smiled. She began to talk to the girl, knowing she wouldn't get an answer. "My, this room has the best view," she'd say while wiping the windows. "You can see all the way to the hills. I'll bet it's pretty when it rains." The girl just watched. Always watched. Then, one afternoon, the maid saw something that made her heart stop. She was cleaning the patio, and she looked through the glass doors into the kitchen. The family's golden retriever, a dog that was as silent and nervous as the rest of the house, had come inside. The dog went to the little girl, who was sitting at the table, and nudged her hand. The girl, thinking no one was looking, looked left, then right. The kitchen was empty. She leaned her head down to the dog's soft ear. The maid held her breath, and she heard it. A whisper. Just one tiny breathy word. "Good," the girl whispered. "Good boy." The maid felt tears spring to her eyes. She could speak. She wasn't mute. She was hiding. Her mind raced. Why pretend? Why would this whole family, with all their money and doctors, be part of this? This lie, the hook, the deep suspicion had set in. But it was the following Tuesday that the suspicion turned into cold, hard fear. The maid was in the hall, just outside the library. The father was inside, on one of his angry phone calls. "I don't care what it costs," he boomed, his voice hitting the marble walls and flying out into the hall. "You fix it. You fix it now." The little girl was walking down the hall, holding a small glass of water. She was bringing it, the maid assumed, to her mother. The father burst out of the library, his face purple with rage. He was still screaming into his phone. He didn't even see his daughter. The girl froze. Her eyes went wide. She was a mouse, and the hawk was in the sky. The father slammed his hand against the wall to end his call. Useless. All of them. The sound of the slap against the wall, though not directed at her, was enough. The little girl dropped the glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the water and glass spraying everywhere. Time stopped. The girl didn't move. She didn't look at the glass. She looked at her father. Her whole body was shaking, a vibration so intense the maid could see it from 10 feet away. The father turned slowly. His rage didn't fade. It just shifted. It found a new target. He looked at the broken glass. Then he looked at his daughter. "You are useless," he hissed, his voice low and more terrifying than his yell. "You can't do one simple thing." The maid wanted to run, to scream, to grab the girl. But she was frozen, hidden by the doorway. The girl just stared. Her face was white. Her chest was heaving. She opened her mouth. It wasn't a word. It was a sound. A tiny, desperate animal sound, like a kettle that had been left to boil for too long. A high, thin, ee. And then, her eyes rolled back and she collapsed, fainting dead away onto the cold, wet floor. The father just looked down at her. He didn't move. He just stared. Then he turned, saw the maid watching, and his eyes went dark. "Get the housekeeper," he snapped. "And you saw nothing." But the maid had. She had seen everything. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the silence in this house wasn't an illness. It was a prison. And she had just seen the jailer. The father's cold, angry words. "You saw nothing. hung in the air, a command that was also a threat. The maid was frozen for only a second. The girl's faint, that terrifying silent collapse, had broken the spell of the house. This was no longer just a job she needed. This was a child she needed to understand. Before the maid could even move, the mother came sweeping into the hallway, her face a mask of pale, controlled panic. The strict housekeeper was right behind her, already holding a dustpan and brush. It was a practiced, chillingly efficient routine. "Oh, for heaven's sake," the mother whispered, her anger not at her husband, but at the mess. She didn't rush to her daughter to check for a head injury. She knelt, but her hands hovered, fluttering, as if she were afraid to touch her. "She's done it again. Get her to her room, now." The housekeeper, strong and silent, lifted the small, limp girl as if she were a bundle of laundry. The father had already turned his back and was walking back to his study, adjusting his cuffs. He was done with the interruption. "And you," the mother said, standing up and fixing the maid with a look as hard and cold as the marble floor. "You are paid to clean up messes, not to stand and stare at them. You will forget this. You will forget all of it. If I hear one word, one whisper, you will be gone. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," the maid said. But in her heart, she was lying. She could never forget the sound the girl made, or the terror in her eyes. The girl could make a sound. She was just too afraid to. The maid now knew, with absolute certainty, that the father was the jailer. But she didn't know what the crime was. Not yet. From that day on, the maid's job changed. On the surface, she was the perfect, invisible cleaner. She polished the glass, she vacuumed the thick, white rugs, she dusted the cold, modern art. But beneath the surface, she was a detective. Her eyes and ears were wide open, searching for the truth that this house was trying so hard to bury. She started to notice the real routine. She saw the mother, late at night, trying to coax the little girl to drink a glass of milk. The maid watched from the dark hallway. "Please, darling, just drink," the mother pleaded, her voice soft. "It has your medicine. It will help you sleep. It will help you forget." The little girl just stared at the glass. Then, with a tiny, deliberate motion, she shook her head. Her jaw was clamped shut. "Why won't you let me help you?" The mother whispered, and this time her voice broke. She left the milk on the knitstand, untouched, and walked out, her shoulders shaking with a silent sob. The maid felt a pang of pity for the mother. She was trapped too. The house was quiet, but it was not silent. There were whispers. A few nights later, the maid was cleaning the main staircase, long after the family was supposed to be asleep. She heard voices from the father's study. The door was cracked open. She slipped into the shadows, her dust cloth in hand, and listened. It was the father and the mother. Their voices were low, sharp, and full of poison. "This is getting out of control," the father's voice hissed. "The new maid." She saw her faint. "She knows something. What do you expect?" The mother's voice shot back, surprisingly strong. "You never control your temper. You walk around this house like a storm, and you expect a child to just endure it? You promised. After it happened, you promised. Don't you dare," he snarled. "Don't you dare put this on me. It was your responsibility. You were supposed to be watching them." Them. The word hit the maid like a stone. Them, not her. Them. The mother let out a small, strangled sound. "Watching them? Or watching you?" A long, heavy silence filled the space. The maid held her breath. Finally, the father spoke again, his voice flat and dead. "It doesn't matter. She has to forget. Whatever it costs, whatever medicine it takes, she must never remember what happened. We have to keep her quiet." The maid slipped away, her heart pounding a sick rhythm against her ribs. There was someone else. And whatever happened, the girl had seen it. And now, they were medicating her, trying to make her forget. The maid knew she couldn't push. She couldn't ask questions. That would get her fired. If she was going to help this little girl, she had to be a friend, not an interrogator. She had to be a safe space in this cold, glass prison. She continued her quiet, one-sided conversation. When she cleaned the girl's room, she hummed her gentle song. "This is a lovely room," she'd say, dusting the silent, staring dolls. "But it's a bit too quiet, isn't it? I like music myself." She left another yellow flower on the knitstand. The next day, it was gone. The day after that, she left a small foil-wrapped piece of chocolate. It, too, disappeared. Then, one morning, she came in to make the bed, and she saw it. Tucked just under the edge of the pillow was a piece of paper, folded into a tiny, neat square. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She unfolded it. It was a drawing. A child's drawing, done in black and dark red crayon dot. It was a picture of a house. But the house was all dark lines, scribbled and angry. On one side of the paper, there was a huge, towering figure. It wasn't a person. It was just a giant, furious scribble of black and red, an explosion of rage. On the other side of the paper, at the very bottom, was a tiny, tiny stick figure. It was hiding under what looked like a bed. The maid's blood ran cold. The girl hadn't just fainted when her father yelled. She had been reliving a nightmare. The drawing was a map of her terror. She had to know more. She had to know who "them" was. She cornered the cook in the kitchen later that day. The cook was an older woman who had been with the family for years, and she rarely spoke. "It's so sad," the maid began, trying to sound casual as she washed her hands. The little girl. The trauma that ... That made her stop speaking. It must have been terrible. The cook's heavy knife slammed down on the cutting board, cutting a carrot in half. She turned, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "We don't talk about that," she snapped. "Not ever. You like this job? You keep your head down. You clean the floors. You keep your mouth shut." She pointed the knife at her. "Don't ask questions. Don't go looking for things. Some things are better left buried." The maid backed away, her hands up. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean any harm." She thought it was a dead end. But later that evening, as she was taking the trash to the bins outside, the cook was there, smoking a cigarette in the fading light. Her hands shaking. The cook looked around, her eyes darting to the big glass house. "You're a good woman," she whispered, not looking at the maid. "You have kind eyes. I can see it. That's why you need to leave. This place. It's poisoned. What happened?" The maid pleaded, her voice low. "You said we don't talk about it. What is it?" The cook took one last long drag, the cherry of the cigarette glowing bright red in the dusk. She crushed it under her shoe. "It wasn't always just her," the cook whispered, and then she turned and walked back inside. Leaving the maid alone in the dark. It wasn't always just her. There was a boy. The maid's mind was on fire. A boy. Where was he? A brother? A cousin? Why was he gone? The entire house was a shrine to the silent girl, but there was not a single photograph, not a single toy, not a single trace of a boy. It was like he had been erased. The next day, she was assigned to deep clean, the second floor, a wing that was usually kept locked. "It's just for storage," the housekeeper said. "The mister is thinking of turning it into a gym. He wants it cleared out." The maid's heart hammered. This was her chance. She cleaned the empty guest rooms, her mind racing. At the very, very end of the long carpeted hall, there was one last door. It was white, just like all the others, but the doorknob was different. It was old, brass, and had a keyhole. She tried the handle. Locked. She stared at it. "Storage," the housekeeper had said. But it didn't feel like storage. It felt ... final. She was about to give up when she saw it. On the floor, just by the door, half hidden by the carpet, was a single small ornate silver key. It looked like a key to a diary or a small music box. It was so small, it must have been missed for years. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely pick it up. This couldn't be it. It was too small, but she looked at the keyhole. It was tiny. She slid the silver key in. It didn't fit. She felt a wave of disappointment. Then she looked again. The keyhole wasn't for the knob. It was a separate, smaller lock just above the knob. A child's lock? A privacy lock? She tried the key in the tiny second lock. Click. It wasn't the main lock. It was something else. But when she tried the handle again, it still didn't turn. She was crushed. But as she pulled the key out, she jiggled the handle in frustration, and the door itself moved. It wasn't locked at all. It was just stuck. The wood had swollen in the frame. The lock she'd opened must have been a simple deadbolt, long since rusted. She put her shoulder against it and pushed. With a deep groan of old wood, the door scraped open. The smell hit her first. Stale, dusty, unmoving air. The air of a room that had not been opened in a very, very long time. She stepped inside. The curtains were drawn, but enough light seeped through to see. This was not storage. This was a child's bedroom. It was painted a soft pale blue. There was a small bed, perfectly made. On a shelf, model airplanes and spaceships were covered in a thick gray blanket of dust. A baseball glove sat on a wooden chair. This was the boy's room. Her eyes went to the wall. Above the dresser was a single large, framed photograph. She walked over and wiped the thick film of dust off the glass with her sleeve. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the girl. But it was a girl she had never seen. She was smiling. A huge, bright, gap-toothed smile, her arms thrown around a little boy who looked exactly like her. He was smiling too. They were twins. The maid felt tears burn her eyes. She wanted to run, to get out of this tomb. But as she backed away, her foot hit something on the floor, half hidden under the bed, just like in the drawing. She knelt, her knees cracking in the silence. She reached under the dusty bedspread. Her fingers closed around something small and metal. She pulled it out. It was a small red die-cast toy truck. One of its wheels was broken off, and right next to where she'd found it, on the pale blue carpet, was a dark, faded, rust-colored stain. She didn't need to be a detective. She didn't need to ask any more questions. She knew. The maid scrambled backwards out of the room, her hand clasped over her mouth, muffling a sob. The accident wasn't an accident. And the girl hadn't just seen it. She had been right there. The red toy truck felt heavy in her hand, like a stone. The maid stood in the dusty blue bedroom, the image of the smiling twins burning in her mind. The stain on the carpet, the drawing of the figure hiding under the bed. The father's terrifying rage, the mother's nightly medicine to make her forget. It all came together in a wave of sickening, horrifying clarity. This was not a house. It was a tomb. And the family wasn't just hiding a death. They were actively, daily, burying the girl's mind right alongside her brother. She backed out of the room, her hand shaking so badly she could barely push the door shut. It scraped closed with a deep, groaning sound, sealing the secret back inside. But it was too late. The secret was out, and it was in her pocket. She needed confirmation. She needed a name. She found the cook in the kitchen, furiously chopping vegetables, her knuckles white. The maid didn't say a word. She just walked up, her heart hammering, and held out her hand, palm up. The broken, red toy truck sat in the center. The cook's knife stopped. She stared at the truck. Her whole body went rigid. "Where?" the cook whispered, her voice barely audible. "Did you find that?" "In his room," the maid replied, her own voice shaking. "What was his name?" The cook squeezed her eyes shut. A single hot tear rolled down her heavy cheek and splashed onto the cutting board. No. No. You have to put it back. You have to forget you saw it. He will ruin you. What was his name? The maid demanded, her voice stronger now, fueled by a new, cold anger. Leo, the cook sobbed, her whole body slumping. She finally looked up, her eyes flooded with a grief 2 years old. His name was Leo, and he was her other half. He was the sun, and she was the moon. He was loud, and she was quiet. He was the one who always protected her. Until he couldn't. And then the story poured out. The cook spoke in a fast, terrified whisper, as if saying the words aloud could get them both killed. It happened 2 years ago. The father was in a state, a word the staff used for his blind, violent rages over a market crash. He was screaming, throwing things in his study. The children, only 6 years old, were playing in the hall. They were being too loud. Leo, always the brave one, did what his mother was too scared to do. He walked to the study door and yelled, "Stop yelling at Mommy. You're scaring her." The father exploded. He stormed out, his face a mask of fury. Leo, terrified, ran. He ran into his bedroom and hid under the bed, just like in the girl's drawing, but the father followed him. He dragged him out. The girl was right there, the cook whispered, her hand over her mouth. She was in the doorway, watching. He was yelling, and he pushed him. He just pushed him, hard. Leo stumbled backward, hitting his head, hard, on the corner of the heavy iron bed frame. The broken truck, which had been in his hand, went flying. He didn't die right away. But the damage was done. He died 2 days later in the hospital. The official report said he'd fallen while playing. The father, with his army of lawyers and doctors, made sure it was clean. But the girl knew. The girl saw. So they silenced her, the maid whispered, the horror of it dawning on her. No, the cook said, her eyes dark. Worse, they blamed her. They told her it was her fault. That if she hadn't been playing so loud, if she hadn't made him run. They told her that her noise, her joy, had killed her brother. They told her that until she was so broken, she just stopped. She stopped speaking to make sure she could never, ever hurt anyone again. The maid finally understood. The girl wasn't just silent from terror. She was silent from a guilt that no child should ever have to carry. The maid knew, in that moment, that she was going to be fired. She didn't care. She was going to burn this glass prison to the ground. She couldn't go to the police. The father's power was too great. She had to expose him in a way he couldn't control, in a place where his money and lawyers couldn't hide him. The opportunity came 1 week later. The family was hosting its annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital. It was the father's biggest PR event of the year. The house was filled with hundreds of the city's most powerful and influential people. Reporters, politicians, and business rivals were all there, drinking champagne, their diamonds glittering in the cold, modern ballroom.